Hi, everybody, and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. I am John Schmeelk. Matt Citak with me today. The phone number for you, get on the lines, 201-939-4513. Yesterday, Paul and Lance talked a lot about the franchise tag, which the window opened yesterday for teams to franchise players. They get a few weeks to do that. We'll talk about more about that stuff moving forward. You want to call about it, we're happy to answer your questions on it. We'll touch on that stuff at the Combine next week as well. But we thought today, this is my last show hosting until we're out in Indy next week. So I figured this would be a good time to take a look at what some of the big questions are that we're going to be trying to figure out the answers to while we're out at the NFL Combine next week. And Matt, I thought the good way to do this, and this was your idea, to kind of take a look at a couple of the more recent mock drafts that came out and use those as a basis for how we're going to have this discussion. So let's start with NFL.com. Daniel Jeremiah, who right now I think along with Mel Kiper are the two guys that people look at for their mock drafts, right?
Definitely.
So the turning point of this draft, and I think we're all in agreement here that it's going to be Caleb Williams and a quarterback 1-2.
Yes.
You don't know who that number 2 quarterback is going to be yet. If you had to guess right now, which guy do you think goes number 2?
For some reason I lean slightly towards Jaden Daniels.
I agree. That's my gut feeling too. I would take Drake May, I think, but I think it's very close. I could see people thinking either way.
That will be one of the, I think, big things that people are looking for next week, to see if one of those two quarterbacks kind of takes the step above the other one.
Correct.
In Indy. So.
I would think if these, and look, I don't think evaluators would look at it this way because they know what they're doing. To me, what quarterbacks do with the Combine, aside from the meetings with teams, should almost be meaningless. Like, you watch so many Drake May and Jaden Daniels plays and throws in real life. I don't think what they do throwing at the Combine should really affect things, but the meetings for the quarterbacks and what they do interacting with the teams, that could impact how teams think about these guys.
Definitely. The meetings are definitely the most important aspect, but I will say, if you remember last year at the Combine, heading into that week in Indy, of course, Anthony Richardson was projected to be a first-round pick, top of the first round. I don't know if everyone sort of consensus believed that he would be locked into the 4th pick until after he had one of the most insane Combine performances ever from a quarterback, and that kind of locked him in as a top 5 pick. So the meeting's definitely the most important aspect of it. I will say, especially with more and more quarterbacks relying on mobility and their athleticism, some of the actual drills at the Combine definitely have some importance as well.
I do wonder if that's more of a media thing or more of an NFL thing. If the NFL was already locked in there, maybe we didn't know it yet.
Fair question.
And I'm curious to see if Jaden Daniels does some of those timed events, right?
Yeah.
Because we all think he's so athletic, and the bar is probably so high for him. Does he really help himself by doing any of those things?
It's
Remember,
true.
Lamar Jackson famously did nothing at the Combine.
Yeah.
He's like, you guys see me. You don't need to know how fast I am. You see how fast I am, right?
For sure.
And Jaden Daniels, an 80-yard touchdown run this year, something ridiculous like
Yeah.
that. So I'm curious to see if he ends up running. But the fulcrum of this draft, I think, is right now going to be at number 3. Because there are whispers out there, Matt, that the Patriots might not take a quarterback.
Yep.
That, to me, is crazy. Just for the record, and I'll say this next week when I preface the questions, if you're starting over with a new coach, new GM, I know not technically a GM, but a new personnel guy in there, and frankly, you're as talent deficient as the Patriots are, you take a look at their roster up and down, how many All-Pro and Pro Bowl players are on the Patriots roster? They're just not there. They don't have them. And you have an opportunity in the top 3 to pick somebody. And now, maybe they don't think one of these, the quarterback back there, is a true top 5 player. But if you do think one of these guys is a top 5 player, and you have a chance to add one of those guys without having to use a lot of draft capital to move up to get one, to me, passing on that opportunity is borderline insanity.
I'm with you, especially, how many times have the Patriots drafted this high up in the last 24 years. Granted, I know it's a lot looks a lot different in New England now than it did for most of that 20-plus year period. But so what, I can't remember which analyst I saw write this last week, but it was talking about the Patriots at number 3, and this person said that he thinks that they're going to pass on a quarterback because of what you just mentioned, the rest of the roster not being at a point where it's ready to have that rookie quarterback come in to take advantage of the full rookie quarterback window that a lot of people say your best chance of winning is while your quarterback is still on that rookie contract. So maybe that's what they're thinking, that they want to upgrade all the talent elsewhere on the roster first, and then, maybe next year try to find that quarterback. I don't necessarily agree with that.
Because you have to get back and pick that high again. There's no
Exactly.
guarantee of that.
And if they're not, then they'd have to trade up most likely next year in order to take the quarterback that they want.
Or maybe this quarterback class, next year's quarterback class is like last year's quarterback class from 2 years ago, when you don't even think there's a top 10 quarterback there.
Yeah, I mean, already analysts are saying that next year's quarterback class is a lot weaker than this year's. Obviously, that could change. The guys could arise from, out of left field. But as of now, this quarterback class is definitely considered to be a lot stronger than next year's.
Well, think about it. At this time last year, we already knew Caleb Williams was going to be a top 2 quarterback. You knew Drake May was going to be a top 3 quarterback. And Jaden Daniels emerged. He's a guy we didn't see going that high. And you can go back to the Baker Mayfields and Kyler Murrays. You kind of knew what those guys were heading into that final year, even the C.J. Strouds, guys like that. Right now, you could give me 5 guesses. I couldn't tell you who the first quarterback's going to be drafted next year. And that's usually not a great sign for what that class is going to look like. All right, so we're in agreement there. Then the question is, if they do take that alternate strategy, right? Because I think that's when things get more interesting. So let's talk about that scenario first. And this would be a scenario we'll kind of figure out next week at the Combine. And one thing I'm definitely going to do, I'm going to go listen to Jared Mayo do his press conference. And I don't know if Elliott Wolf is going to do a press conference there as well, but if he does, I'm going to listen to that too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So you can't pick a non-quarterback at 3, all right? You're either going to pick the quarterback or you're going to trade down and get a lot of stuff.
Yes.
Because if your theory is that your roster is so bad it can't take a quarterback, guess what? You need a lot of players to fill out the roster.
Yes, that is true.
You agree with that?
Yes.
Agree. So then you're talking about the Patriots trading out of that pick, and then it's open season here. And you can go back to when the Jets drafted Sam Darnold. They moved up 3 spots for a quarterback. It cost them 3 second-round picks. But I think this is a little bit different because that's going to be the last quarterback that's in that elite category.
Yes.
So I'm not saying it's the equivalent of trading up to number 1, but the Patriots are probably going to treat it that way. Well, if you're not picking in the top 2 and you want a quarterback, we're the only place you can come and shop. So they're going to play all these quarterback-needy teams against each other. So my guess is the price is going to be higher than 3-2s. I think a first-round pick is going to have to be involved in that if you're going to try to move up. I'm assuming the Chargers and the Cardinals at 4 and 5 are not going to move up for that pick, but anyone below, that might be a quarterback-needy team. Falcons, Vikings, Raiders, maybe the Seahawks, Broncos. And this is the point. Look at all the teams we just mentioned. There's going to be a bidding war for that pick. So it's going to be expensive to move up. But again, if the Giants do determine that they want to go quarterback here and they want to move up, right? And we don't know. We'll hear from Joe Shane next week as well. The benefit to them is that if the Patriots want to make sure they get one of these elite players on their board, they're closest, right? So the Giants' offer is automatically going to be more advantageous to them because they don't have to drop down as far. So I do think that's interesting. I don't think Joe Shane's afraid to move if he decides that.
I don't think so either.
That's the right thing to do.
We saw that last year.
So I do think that's something to keep an eye on next week. If that Patriot pick becomes available, and again, I will believe it when I see it, and I think free agency will tell us a lot what they do in free agency at the quarterback position if they bring in a veteran. But that to me is where the real interesting start comes, and I don't feel like that's going to, here's the interesting thing. Would that have to be a draft day trade?
No, I don't think so.
Well, here's the problem. What happens if you're a team and you only like one of Daniels or May? And you don't know who the Commanders are picking. Well,
then, of course, you can't make that trade now.
Well, and
then you can't.
That's why it's interesting, right?
I personally think New England will, if they decide they do not want to pick a quarterback, they want to take another position, I think they will trade that pick before the start of the first round.
I agree, but would that then limit the teams that would be interested in the pick?
Yeah, it might, but I think there are a lot of GMs out there that would rather have the benefit of being able to go into free agency knowing exactly what the situation looks like over the next 2 months in terms of cap space, draft picks, the whole lot. And another piece of this that there are reports that we could get an answer to very soon. Chicago obviously sitting there with the first pick. There's been a lot of rumblings all over the place about what they might do, what that means for Justin Fields. New England has popped up, but from a lot of different reporters as a potential destination for Justin Fields. And I saw that the Bears will likely have a decision made between Fields, Caleb Williams, number 1 pick. They want to have that made by the start of the combine.
Yeah,
which
that
means
would not surprise me.
Which means Justin Fields, in theory, could get traded by next weekend.
Could be traded at the combine.
Could be traded at the combine. He
Sure.
could be on the Patriots, the Falcons, one of these other teams that are reportedly have interest in him.
On draft season, Tony Pauline indicated he heard that maybe the Raiders might have interest in him as well. Remember, they just hired Luke Getsy, so he's very familiar with Justin Fields from Chicago.
I mean, all the teams that you just mentioned as quarterback-needy teams that could trade up in the draft, all of those teams, I feel like,
bingo.
Besides maybe the Giants, just because of the Giants' current quarterback situation, all those other teams could definitely be teams that are interested in trading for Justin Fields.
And we have gotten questions about Fields here. My always point is that it's going to be hard because then you're never catching your quarterback position at a low salary. You're going to go from one high salary guy to another, which I think makes it a little bit more difficult, right?
Definitely.
You would have those guys. So I think that, and we could talk about that too. So, all right. So that's one scenario. No quarterback at 3. Then it's chaos. All right. Then it's fun. Quarterback at 3, that's chalk. I still think that's going to happen. So does Matt. We'll see what it is in reality. I think you're still in a great spot at the Giants at 6 then. You're looking at a number of what I would consider blue chip players here, Matt, and you can add someone else into this conversation if you want, but I think the 5 players we'll be talking about, if the 3 quarterbacks go 1 through 3, are Malik Neighbors from LSU, Roma Dunzier from Washington, Joe Alt from Notre Dame, Olu Fashanu from Penn State, and Brock Bowers from Georgia. Those are the 5 guys to me that I would then have a conversation about in terms of who the next 5 excellent players are on the board. And you take a look, it's no surprise. Let's go with Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft. He has, and Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm assuming, is not going to make it to the Giants. He would be there.
He's not going to be there.
Correct.
6.
Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Joe Alt, Jaden Daniels, Olu Fashanu. Then he has J.J. McCarthy at 8. I think that's a little bit rich for my blood.
Yeah.
But okay. Roma Dunze at 9, and there's your top group, right? Look at Dane Brugler's top 100 list when you take a look at what he has in his top 100. 1 Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, Neighbors, May, Bowers, Alt, Odunzie, Daniels, Fashanu, 1 through 9. Those are the 9 guys. Field Yates says Bowers dropping a little bit further in his mock draft because he's a tight end. But those are the 5 names that we're going to be talking about all week next week and figuring out which guy's the best and which position that makes more sense for the Giants as well.
Yeah, I will add just one name.
Go ahead.
And he is currently the 10th pick to the Jets in Jeremiah's latest mock draft, which is Fuaga from Oregon State.
I think I'm going to confirm this next week. I think it might be you know how it's a Tua Tagovailoa? I think it might be Fuanga.
Fuanga, okay.
It has like the silent N, it has like the fake N in there, just like Tua does. But I will double check that next week. And I talked to him at the Senior Bowl. Talaese Fuanga, I believe is correct.
Talaese Fuanga.
Yes.
So you were obviously down in Mobile. He was one of the top offensive linemen down there that week. And already, Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft has him going to the Jets at number 10. I think a strong showing at the Combine, some good meetings. He could potentially move up above Fashanu and be, I still think Joe Alt will be the first offensive lineman taken. But, depending on how he does in Indy, Fuanga maybe gets up there and at least causes a debate for teams looking for O-line help in the top 10, right there with Joe Alt.
There are a lot of people that like him.
That would be the only guy that you didn't mention that I would say,
fair.
2+ months out, maybe.
Now, I will say 2 things about Fuanga. One, I think he's a really good player. I think he's a safe pick. Watching him in Mobile, and I know some NFL teams think he's more of a guard than a tackle too. He did get beat by some speed rushers outside in Mobile. Like Adisa Isaac from Penn State got him 2 or 3 times. And those are those smaller, quicker outside rushers, right? So I'm curious to see what his testing is at the Combine. I do think that's very important. Look at his 3-cone drill and some of his agility stuff to see if he has that type of range to be able to get out and deal with some of those speed rushers at the NFL level. But
totally fair.
I wouldn't shock. Like, I could see some teams liking Tyler Guyton more than him at tackle. I wouldn't surprise if those 2 guys flip-flop depending on how you want to look at it. But, yeah, I think that's a very good name, and I think he very well could be a top 10 pick in that mix where I think everyone thinks the Jets are picking an offensive tackle at 10. Of all the mock drafts you look at, that's the one thing that seems to be certain. And I'll say this, too. I'm not going to eliminate him from my conversation. If I'm choosing between Brock Bowers and either one of those 2 wide receivers, I'm picking the wide receiver.
Yeah.
I can't pick
I
I
agree.
can't pick Brock Bowers over Odunze or Neighbors. I just can't do it. So if that's an option, I have a hard time doing that, and I would have a hard time picking Bowers over Alter, Fashanu either, to be totally honest with you. Just because it's a tight end. He's not – his production, his receiving skills matter top tier, but he's not a 255-pound tight end that does all that stuff. He's only 240 pounds. So it's not like he's going to give you that full two-way player where he's going to be a George Kittle-level blocker plus an awesome receiver. He'll be a fine blocker. He'll be okay, but he's never going to – he just doesn't have the size and the girth to be a great blocker. So I would put Bowers below those other four, for me at least, when I have that conversation.
Oh, I'm with you, and especially when you just consider positional value. I mean, Odunze, Malik Neighbors, obviously Marvin Harrison, not going to be there at 6. So, but those other two guys, in almost any other year's draft, would probably be the number one wide receiver.
It would have been last year.
Yeah, it's just that this year there's the three of them that are all elite blue chip prospects, and Marvin Harrison clearly is a slight step above, even though I've seen some people argue that Malik Neighbors is right up there with Marvin Harrison.
I talked to some people, and they told me they know scouts that have Neighbors ahead of Harrison on their board. So
Yeah.
that would not shock me.
Yeah, but you can draft a guy that you would think would be able to step in and from day one be your number one receiver, and you have him on a rookie contract for 4 years plus the 5th-year option. With how expensive and big contracts that these number one receivers are getting once they hit free agency, there's a lot of value there to grab one on a rookie contract.
And wide receivers, I think, are also more NFL ready than tight ends. Tight ends
Yeah.
have to learn so much with the run game, the blocking scheme. I think the learning curve for them is a little bit better, a little bit longer rather than it is for wide receivers, who I think can kind of step in and kind of really be impactful right away as rookie wide receivers.
Also, real
Yes,
quick,
go ahead,
I don't know
please.
if you saw this photo that was going around Las Vegas the week of the Super Bowl.
I did
but
not.
Brock Bowers, I think he did an interview with Gronk and was standing next to
He's
him.
tiny, right? I heard about
He
that.
looks so tiny. And I know he's not like Brock Bowers. What is he? 6'4", 6'3"?
Yeah, I think he's like 6'3", 240,
Yeah,
something like
not
that.
a small guy, but he was standing next to Gronk, and it looked like it was like an NFL player standing next to like a high school football player.
Really?
Like that's how drastic it looked in this one photo.
That's funny. And look, and that's to the point I'm making, right? He's going to be a great receiving tight end, but you wonder if he can develop into that two-way player, which, again, isn't essential to be – look at Tony Gonzalez. He never blocked a day in his life. He's a Hall of Famer. So it's not essential, but it's something that I think if you're going to draft a tight end like that high, you want to be able to get a guy that at least can develop into an elite two-way guy. I'm just not sure Bauer's frame and stature will allow him to do that. So I think there are two parts of this too, Matt. This will be the last thing we do before we get to your calls at 201-939-4513. And I'm struggling with this too. I'm still kind of going back and forth on it. I'm always drafting for the long term. I'm going to draft the most talented guy because I think you just stack talent at important positions and everything's going to work out, right? And that's the easiest way to handle these things. I think that's the way to make sense. But I will say this. We're in year 3 of the Dable Shane era. I do think it is important for their, and this is not my priority, but I do think it's important to show progress from last year to this year and to get the team better now. So I do think as a tiebreaker almost, I would lean toward the spot that I know for a fact I need help at and I think will help me more now than another spot where maybe is more of a long-term thing. And this is where I'm kind of balancing tackle and wide receiver. And I think it's a really tough decision because wide receiver is deeper. If you draft a tackle in the top 10, you can get a wide receiver at the top of the second round that's going to be really good. And You're going to be in great shape. But you do have somebody in your building in Evan Neal that you still think has a chance and a possibility to be a good right tackle, right?
Yep.
So with you then maximizing all of the talent and resources you have available to you, if you're then duplicating a position that you don't have to duplicate with that top 10 pick. And that's kind of the balance I'm trying to figure out here in terms of if those grades are the same, if they're equal, do you go tackle or do you go wide receiver?
Yeah, look, that is probably one of the biggest questions that the front office is currently, pondering up in the draft room upstairs. That exact thing. Now, I will say, free agency starts in a couple weeks.
Good point.
I feel like, once we get to April, once we get through the first few weeks of free agency, we see some of the moves that Joe Schoen and the front office make. I think that will be not a clear sign, but will be somewhat of a telling sign on how they plan on approaching the offensive line in the draft. If they go out and sign, 2 starting offensive linemen, you never know, but my guess would be that they don't plan on taking an offensive lineman at 6.
I agree with you.
If they only sign one starting guy, then or none, then I think clearly that position is in play in the first round.
Or if they go draft, sign a big-time wide receiver, then maybe the wide receiver at 6 maybe is not a big option. No, I think it's a good point. And that's why, and I say this with Tony all the time on draft season. And by the way, go subscribe to Draft Season. Great draft podcast. I hate talking about team needs this early because it doesn't make any sense. They're going to change.
It's fun to talk about.
It is fun, but at this point, it's meaningless because they will change completely once Fields gets traded. You have all the free agency moves, and that's going to fill holes for these teams. Then all of a sudden, they signed T. Higgins. They're not going to draft a wide receiver, whatever, for any team. So I hate to get too deep into needs now, but we're so close to the Giants, obviously, that's something that we can have a longer discussion about. But those are kind of, to me at least, the big questions from a draft perspective we want to talk about heading in. We talked about Jeremiah's mock draft. He has Jaden Daniels falling to the Giants at 6. He makes the note in his mock that this will never happen in real life. He's going to be off the board at 3, whether it's the Patriots or somebody else trading up to get him. So you're not going to be able to sit and pick a quarterback at 6, at least in my opinion. Someone else is going to move up to try to get that player in front of you.
Yes.
At least those top 3. Now, maybe you like the McCarthys, the Penixes, the Bo Nixes. I don't know what the Giants think about those guys.
Entirely possible.
Who knows? Then you could sit and pick those guys at 6. I feel pretty confident you'll be able to do that.
Yeah.
But I think one of those top 3 guys, if you want one of them, you're going to have to move up to get them. And that might not even be possible depending on what those top 3 teams want to do.
Yeah, and I do think it's just interesting to note that in the little write-up of Jeremiah's for the Giants picking Jaden Daniels, he says, I don't mock trades, so, he probably won't be here at 6. But he does note, I wouldn't rule out the Giants trying to move up for a quarterback. So, again, this is one of the more connected draft analysts out there, and he thinks there's at least a chance the Giants could have interest in making a move like that. So, just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Tony Pauline said the same thing on draft season. Is that up yet, Pearson? I think it just went up draft season, right? So go check out draft season. That's a point that Tony Pauline made when he selected for the Giants at number 6. I stole Malik Neighbors from him. He got very upset. And he ended up taking Roman. Yeah, I would have been upset too. It's funny, like I have Neighbors, man. I said that was the last thing I lied. Who cares? If you go wide receiver, and maybe Neighbors and Odunze won't both be there at 6 for the Giants. I think there's a good chance that one of those guys could go ahead of them, right?
Yeah.
In addition to Marvin Harrison Jr. Or maybe not. Maybe the Chargers, I think, are going to be interesting with Harbaugh. Do they go offensive line just because it's a Jim Harbaugh team and you kind of want to be that big physical team? They ready for Sean Slater? Do they want to draft the second tackle? We'll see. I think that's a big question we'll try to figure out next week, too. If Neighbors and Odunze are both there, this is another thing I'm struggling with, and I have not made my decision on this yet. I think Neighbors is the better player. As a player, in a vacuum, I would draft Malik Neighbors before I drafted Rome Odunze. But as a fit with the other wide receivers in the Giants roster, with Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robinson, to an extent Darius Slayton, though he only has 1 year left on his deal, I think Odunze is a better fit with those other 2 wide receivers. Where would you land if both those guys are staring you right in the face?
Ooh, that is tough. First of all, if that were the case, I kind of consider that a win-win.
100% agree.
Both of these guys, as we've said, elite prospects in a normal draft would probably be the number 1 wide receiver taken. I think I'd lean slightly towards Neighbors. I just think he just is a slightly better wide receiver.
He's special.
He is special. However, if the Giants ended up with Odunze, I would be thrilled would be an understatement.
I just like the big 6'3" downfield receiver to pair with the speed of Hyatt and the elusiveness of Wan'Dale.
Yeah.
It's the perfect basketball team.
When was the last time the Giants had a big receiver like that? A big 6 foot, 6'4" receiver.
Hakeem Nicks played that way, but he wasn't. It was Plax, really. If you want to go actual size, it was Plaxico Burress.
Was it 15 years ago?
More than
yeah.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. This is Big Blue Kickoff Live. There was Ramses Barden. Let's just be clear about that. We're not forgetting about Ramses Barden.
But so today, very true. A little while ago, Lance Zierlein from NFL.com released his draft prospect profiles.
Oh, they're up.
They're up.
Ooh.
for pretty much all the top guys.
Exciting.
So just to note in this conversation, for Malik Neighbors and Odunze, he has Neighbors with a prospect grade slightly above Odunze, 6.74 for Rome and 6.86 for Malik. However, the thing that I wanted to point out is he also compares the prospects to NFL players, current or former. And for Neighbors, his NFL comparison, Justin Jefferson.
Okay, I like that.
And for Odunze, his comparison, Larry Fitzgerald. So I don't know if it's just me, but I would happily take either one of those two.
And just on his grading scale, 6'7/6'8", those are Pro Bowl caliber players.
Yeah, so both of those guys are Pro Bowl caliber players.
He just has them at slightly different levels within that scale. So, I'm going to kind of steal the NFL.com grading scale when I kind of do my board too. I just think it's a good uniform one to kind of just use to compare to what he does. So, yeah. Both guys really good, and you wouldn't complain about getting either one of them. No question about it. You're listening to Big Blue Kickoff Live right here on Giants.com and the Giants mobile app, brought to you by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. We'll get to your calls in just a second, but first, a reminder. Go check out the Giants Huddle podcast, folks. That's brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Football Giants. Really good interviews on there. A lot of stuff coming from the Combine next week. We'll probably have around 4 huddles, and then we'll try to bank some more for the next couple weeks after that, too. Heading into free agency. There'll be a lot of fun stuff coming from out there, so make sure you check it out right now on the Giants Huddle podcast. I'm trying to remember, Pearson, what's up there right now? Oh, yeah, Doug Farrar from USA Today football editor, also author of a really good book, Genius of Desperation. We do a lot of X's and O's and kind of how scheme on offense and defense has changed and altered in the NFL. If you really want to learn about X's and O's on both sides, it's a really good interview. Doug hosts a podcast with Greg Cosell, the very famous NFL films producer. He does the ESPN matchup show, who's really good on the X's and O's. So is Doug. So again, go check that out on the Giants Huddle podcast. Giants.com/podcast, the Giants app, or just search for Giants Huddle on your favorite podcast platform. And for all of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, leave that 5-star positive review. It helps people find our podcast. All right, 201-939-4513. Let's go to, I want to lead off with James in Georgia, Pearson. James, what's going on, man?
What's going on, guys? What's up?
How you, James? What's going on?
I told you guys on X or Twitter the other day, piggybacks off a guy who was, I don't know, coming at you guys for how y'all do the show. Y'all are great, by the way. And, you know, you and Paul fell into the trap. I was just a little bored. You tweeted back. You said, "I'll be on Wednesday. We'll discuss it then."
Well, James, the reason I tweeted back, I have no problem with criticisms of the show, but when someone makes a statement, he talks out of both sides of his mouth. That's the inference that I'm either a liar or a phony, and that pisses me off. You understand what I'm saying?
No. Yeah. I was bored. Y'all were the best. I was just piggybacking off the guys for, I was just piggybacking off of my
It's all good, man.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you got today for us, James?
I'm still pounding the table for Jaden Daniels, but I could see where that could be a little pricey. But again, would you make an Eli Manning trade again? I know you need somebody to trade with you.
Well, James, let me ask you. James, let me ask you, as someone that called up and is all in on Jaden Daniels, what would you be willing to move up from 6 to 3 to draft Jaden Daniels?
I'm trading the house.
Okay, so it's open. So if the Patriots come back and say, we need your second round, we need your 2-2s this year, both your second round picks this year and your first round pick next year, you're in for that?
Gone. See you later.
All right. Hey,
yes,
much respect, James. You're all in. Good for you.
I appreciate the conviction.
Both seconds are gone because you look at like how you use draft capital and what do we do for Eli Manning? That's why I keep I know it's not the same or whatever, but whatever we traded for him, people are like, oh, I'd do that again. And I'm pretty sure we traded a lot for Eli Manning.
Yes,
for what was only 2 rings.
No, look, and James, here's the thing. If the quarterback you're trading for ends up being Eli Manning and ends up being who's likely going to be a Hall of Fame player, you cannot give up too much for that player. That's how transformational that player can be for your franchise. but you better damn well get it right. Otherwise, you're the Jets, who trade all those
Right.
guys for Sam Darnold and those Zach Wilson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you're in a huge hole that's nearly impossible to get out of.
Yeah, just today, Dan
I
Duggan,
got one more too.
Dan Duggan of The Athletic put out an article looking back at the last, I believe it was 7 or 8 times that a team traded to move up
I'll have
in
to
order
check that out.
in order to take a quarterback.
Yeah, I got
And if you look at the results, I don't think any of those. I might be not remembering someone,
Let me look it up.
but I'm pretty sure almost every single time the team did that, the quarterback ended up being what most would consider a bust.
Really?
Yeah, like I believe Trey Lance might have been the last one a couple of years ago. Obviously, San Francisco was able to get out from underneath that because of hitting on Brock Purdy, but it's not very often you take a last pick of the draft and that guy leads you to a Super Bowl.
Now, like you said, most of them have been a bust. Now, Eli wasn't a bust, but we
Definitely
can't
not.
pretend like Eli's career was, far and away. His win-loss record was something to behold. We made the playoffs every year. You know what I mean? He had a great career, but it was,
Yeah,
it wasn't. I don't want to compare him to somebody, and then everybody be like, Eli's our boy. But let me move on to my third point so I can keep the line moving.
okay.
If you don't do the trade for, a quarterback first or whatever, would a better move be moving back to get the best natural offensive guard or to draft the best tackle right now, like at 6, and move a player, or have in your mind that you're gonna go free agency before the draft and address that position?
Yeah, well, just in terms of
Like taking wide receiver out of your equation at the draft. You're all in on offensive line, but what would you do?
Well,
Get
thank
the
you,
best
James.
offensive guard.
yeah, just
Appreciate the call.
just to the first part of that second question you asked about trading back to potentially take the best guard, they would have to trade pretty far back in the first round in order to be in a place where it would make sense to pick the guard.
I would say not. I'd have to be past 15, right?
Yeah, I was thinking at the earliest 20, low 20s.
You might. I mean, Jackson Powers Johnson might be around
He's-
18.
Yeah,
maybe.
he's the one that most people now believe will be the first interior lineman taken, and he could get into that, late teens, early 20s range.
The other guy that's interesting too is the Washington left tackle, Fatnu,
Oh, yep.
who people might draft him as a tackle, but other people might draft him as a guard. In which
Yeah.
case, you would also probably have to pick him somewhere in that 15 to 25 type of area.
Yeah,
too.
that's true. But what I was trying to get to is that, at least as of right now, the Giants have 2 picks in the second round in the first half of the second round. That, if they went into the draft thinking we want to get one of the top interior linemen, one of the top guards, that would be generally speaking, a good area to pick a guy at that position. There will be some very talented guards available with that first and probably the second pick in the second round. So personally, I don't think the Giants should trade back in the first round in order to target an interior lineman.
I agree.
If they want to trade back to stockpile picks and, pick the top edge rusher or something, to me that makes a little more sense. But to trade back, 10, 15, 20 picks just to take a guard, that doesn't make much sense to me.
I agree. You win in this league by having really good players at really important positions, and there are really good players at really important positions that are going to be available at 6.
Yes.
We're not sitting there talking about picking a linebacker or safety or, even Brock Bowers at tight end. We're talking about offensive tackle, and we're talking about wide receiver.
Yeah.
Positions that have an average annual salary for the best players of over $25 million a year.
Yep.
You can't pass on the opportunity to draft one of those guys. You just can't, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think those guys don't even become available via free agency or trade.
Not very often.
I
no.
mean, trade, yes, for the top wide receivers. Offensive tackle, no way.
no.
No way. It's hard. I'm looking at this article now, so I'm going to kind of just blow through these. This is a great pickup. I didn't see this get posted today. So you have the Bryce Young trade. You have the Trey Lance trade. You have the Sam Darnold trades here, over 3. This would be the Mitch Trubisky trade, 0 for 4. This is the Jared Goff trade. All right, Jared Goff's worked out.
Got him to a
Got
Super
to a
Bowl.
Super Bowl. All right, so that's 1 for 5. Eagles Browns. That was Carson Wentz. You know, it's hard for me to say that was an absolute disaster. Wentz was almost an MVP one year, but overall did not work out.
Yeah.
Obviously, Wentz was barely, he wasn't even in the league for the first 15 weeks last year. Rams and Washington, Robert Griffin III. Again, good player, injury, ended up derailing his career. And those are the ones that Dan looked at. So, yeah, the results are not the best. They're not the best.
So that's just, for everyone out there that's saying the Giants need to trade up, they need to trade up to take a quarterback, just goes to show that even if you do that, that's not a guarantee that the quarterback is going to pan out.
And this is another thing we'll talk a lot about at the Combine with some of the veteran evaluators we'll have on. It's the most difficult evaluation you make at any position in the NFL. Quarterback is so dependent on what's going on between the ears and is so dependent on the system you're in and what they're asking you to do. And trying to figure out how that player in one system is then going to look in your system and in the NFL, it's just a very difficult thing to do. There is no trick to it. There's no special formula. There's no advanced stats you could look at. It's a feel thing, which is what makes it extremely difficult to find a good quarterback at the top of the draft. Like the hit rate for quarterback in the top 10 is so much lower than the hit rate for other positions. Yep. It's just a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I will say this, though. If a couple weeks from now, a month from now, when the front office, not finished with their scouting, but, has their draft board made and they have conviction on all three of the top 3 quarterbacks, they say, we think any of these top 3 guys could be a franchise quarterback. If Joe Shane, the front office, come to that conclusion, then I agree with James. Trade whatever you need to move up to get that pick. If you feel that confident about one of these guys, then I don't mind giving up the first-round pick next year. Even if this year, especially because the first 3 picks are supposed to be quarterbacks, trading up to any of those picks are going to cost a lot. I've seen some mock trades for the Commanders to move up from 2 to 1. Oh, yeah. Only one spot. Granted, it would be to select Caleb Williams, which some people believe will be a generational talent, but still, to move up one spot cost them the second-round pick this year and a first-round pick next year. And that's for one spot. So moving up in this year's draft to the very top is going to be extremely pricey, more pricey than a normal draft. But again, if you have full conviction on Drake May and or Jaden Daniels, and he's sitting there at 3, and the Patriots are willing to move the pick, I'm all for going for it then. Yeah. But you have to be very sure of your decision.
I don't know if I'm trading both 2s this year, dude. I got to be honest with you. I don't know if I'm trading both 2s.
It's
because you do have to fill out the roster a little bit.
I agree with you. It's steep.
But a 1 next year, I'd be willing to do. I'd be willing to do it.
What if it's the first second-round pick this year?
Does that have to be the first second-round pick?
And the first-round pick next year. But you keep the Seahawks second-round pick.
I'm on the fence on that. But right. I would certainly consider it.
Again, I'm only saying this if you have full 100%
I understand.
conviction.
But even if you have 100% conviction, doesn't mean that you're right.
Oh, of course.
That's the problem with it. No.
But at least I'd be more willing to take that chance.
Hey, look, and if anybody's been listening to all the huddles I've gone through this year, and I've asked this question to most of the evaluators, if you want a chance to win the Super Bowl, you have to have a quarterback that can give you top 5 to top 10 level play consistently for a long stretch of time. If you want a chance to win big in this league, it's the most important thing, and then you can figure out the rest.
That is true.
And so you have that. I'm not going to say you're spinning your wheels, but you're in an unenviable position. Because if you don't have one of those guys, you're looking for one of those guys.
Yeah.
And when the Giants signed Daniel Jones last year, obviously I think they had conviction. With better things going on around him, he had the potential to become one of those guys. And maybe he does still have the potential to become one of those guys. Because, frankly, they didn't put enough around him last year with the way the season went when he was healthy. But now with the injury factor, the knee, the second neck injury, that's a whole medical thing that we don't have the details on, but they'll have to make that decision as a front office. Let me say one more thing, by the way. And I've seen this out there. People quote the Tyrod Taylor stats, like the last 7 games of the year, whatever it is, and they say, well, look at that compared to Daniel Jones in the first 7 games. Guys, Andrew Thomas was on the field for the final half of the year. He was not on the field for the first half. John Michael Schmitz was not on the field for a big part of the first part of the year when Daniel Jones was there. All right? They literally had a different offensive line set up every game.
Yeah.
for the first 7 weeks.
It was a revolving door in the first
Every
half.
game. They had Josh Azudu at left tackle for 2 games. Justin Pugh off the couch at left tackle for 2 games. Jalen Hyatt got, you get better as a rookie as the year goes along. By the way, Wanda Robinson wasn't even back for the first part of the season.
Yeah.
He
took some time to, knock the rust off, which is expected after tearing your ACL.
100%. So the situation around the quarterback was much better. And by the way, the opponents weren't as good either, by the way, just for the record. The second half of the year as opposed to the first 6-7 games of the year. So just looking at those stats in a vacuum, did Daniel Jones play well enough in the first half of the year? No, he didn't play well. But again, what was going on around him was much different than what was going on even around Tyrod Taylor the last, and Tommy DeVito for that matter, in the final 7 games.
Yeah, I mean, all those comments, jokes from people around the league about how the Giants' offensive line is a revolving door last season, that was all in the first half of the season.
Yeah, right.
We always talk about continuity being the most important thing along the offensive line, and there was no continuity at all in the first half of the season. Guys were getting injured every single week.
Yeah, 2 things can be true at the same time, right? That you can be open to a quarterback this year and you can attack one if you think one of the guys is great. Doesn't mean that Daniel stinks and the situation around him was good the first half of the year.
Yeah.
You can actually believe those 2 things at the same time. Amazingly. Sure. You got nuance. I know. Who would think? 201-939-4513. Big Ed in Maryland. Big Ed, what's going on, man?
What's up, big guys? What's happening?
How are you, Big Ed?
Man, I am just distraught with y'all. Y'all to be ashamed of yourselves.
Why?
I want y'all to... you about to find out why. Listen to this. For the last 10 years, what has the Giants drafted in the first round, any first 5, 10 picks, right? This is an overall thing, right? And then you look at that, and then you look at the outcome of each season from the last 10 years. I'm looking at it from 2 standpoints. One, coaching. This is Brian Dable's hot seat year. If you cannot beat the Cowboys, if you cannot beat the Eagles, and if you can't go to that championship game, at least you are considered a bad coach.
Wait. Time out.
Players.
Wait. Go to the championship game? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. Because here's why. And I know you're like, well, why you say that? Here's why. If you could take us to a division game and we get blown out, the following year we don't even make the playoffs.
How about
that's a decline instead of upside.
Big Ed.
And then you still have not beaten the Eagles. Well, you beat the Eagles once. I give you that. I love that. But you ain't beat the Cowboys in the last 3 seasons since you've been the coach.
Big
it's
Ed.
always going to come down to the division.
I realize saying this in February 2024 is stupid, and it's probably going to get me into trouble. If the Giants make the playoffs next year, Brian Dable's not getting fired.
No, of course not. Of course not.
But you just said the opposite.
You got to make the playoffs. Look, I'm like the division. I'm 2 ways about it. You got to win in your division, and you win your division, you can be in the playoffs. Now, let's get to these draft picks. Okay. Everybody keeps talking about. All right, let's get to the nasty gritty now. All right,
sure.
Don't hold up and hold by your time because we got a few other people.
Yeah.
So, Big Ed say,
you can
get Joe Ott. Do not move from your spot. If he's not there at 6, you get somebody close to that. And those, I saw something on Facebook about getting the Raiders guard or tackle, and then the Patriots guard, something like that. One of them 2 guys.
Michael,
because of the offensive line coach now that we have had those players.
Michael Onwenu would be the Patriots player I believe you're referring to. I'm not sure which Raider offensive lineman you mean.
There's a few.
Illuminor? Are you talking about Jameer Illuminor, the right tackle?
I think that's who he's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, look, if Daniel Jones is not going to be our starting quarterback at game 1, then we definitely need to get a quarterback, period. I would not mess with North Carolina's quarterback, even though I got a Chapel Hill history, goes all the way back to Lawrence Taylor when he was there. So I already knew Lawrence was going to be great. But to say this, we need to, as far as those 2, see, that's what I like. The first pick definitely needs to be a tackle, somebody like Joe Art, because either that or a quarterback. And then if we go on quarterback, whew, boy. Oh, my gosh. If we go on quarterback on that first pick, it's not going to be Caleb. It's not going to be Caleb.
No, he ain't going to be
I
there.
love Daniels at LSU. Right. I like Daniels at LSU, but we definitely need to find a blue-collar guy. We need blue-collar guys on this coming team. We need guys that are really going to bring the lunch pail every single play. But y'all said, that offensive line was a revolving machine. We can't have that if we're going to progress. And by all means, do not, I repeat, do not let Saquon leave the Giants community over nothing. Now, I can't say more. I could say a whole lot more, but I'll come back try to come back Friday, between Friday and Monday, and say more stuff. But
All right, Big
that's
Ed.
the most of what I do.
I appreciate
Thank
the
you,
call,
Big
man.
Ed.
Thank you. Was that your first Big Ed experience?
Yeah, I believe that was.
It's a trip.
He brings the energy.
He does. He brings the energy. That is true. If they picked the tackle there, I'd be fine with it. I wouldn't have a beef with that at all.
Same.
I'm good.
I mean, I believe I spoke about this with Paul on the show last week, but we've seen what the Lions did over the last couple drafts and free agencies in order to build potentially the best offensive line in the league, of one of the best offensive lines.
Top 5, whatever.
Top
Yeah,
5.
Sure. Mhm.
And, part of that was, Penei Sewell was a big part of that, picking him at, what was it, 6 in that draft. So you'd be hard-pressed to find people, if the Giants do end up taking Joe Alt or Fashanu, whatever tackle, the first tackle at 6. I don't think you're going to find that many people out there that argue that is a bad pick.
No, you can't. And by the way, I know people have been picked Olu Fashanu. Cool, I'm down, man. Like, some people are down on him now all of a sudden. I don't quite understand why. The guy's a freak show with the way he moves. He's one of the best athletes at offensive tackle I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I think he's allowed 1 sack in 2 seasons.
Something crazy like that.
He's good.
And just about the quarterback part that Big Ed brought up, Joe Schoen has made it clear that the Giants are going to be adding to the quarterback room in some capacity this offseason. Now, that could very well be a veteran free agent when free agency starts in a couple weeks. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a quarterback.
Yep.
Even if they do decide they want to take a quarterback in the draft, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be in the first round. Could be on day 2 at some point or later, more of a developmental project at the quarterback position. But Joe Schoen has made it very clear. I mean, right now, Tommy DeVito is the only healthy quarterback on the Giants roster right now.
Is Jacob Eason technically on the roster? I think he is.
No,
right?
he's technically, I believe, an exclusive rights free agent.
Oh, so he's exclusive rights right now. Because he was on the roster page. I wasn't sure if that meant that he was. Okay, I got you.
He, I believe, is an exclusive rights free agent. Joe Schoen's made it clear that there will be at least one, if not multiple quarterbacks added to the room over the next couple of months. We just don't know in what capacity.
And you made the point that if they do a lot of work on the offensive line in free agency, then probably not a quarterback in the draft. Well, if they go out there and they spend a significant amount of money on a really good veteran backup quarterback, then you know what? Maybe you're not picking a quarterback in the first round, and that'll give you a signal in that regard.
Exactly.
But I could see a veteran, though, and then a day 2 or day 3 quarterback, right? Because you're getting
Definitely.
2 guys at different levels there.
Yeah.
The round 2, 3, 4 quarterback, you're not going to, as Joe Schoen said, you need to have somebody in it you can trust to start week 1 in case Daniel's not ready.
Yes.
So I don't think you're going to trust a rookie that's a day 2 or day 3
you don't
quarterback to do that.
You don't want to put a rookie in that situation, having to start on week 1 of the regular season.
So you can do both. You can add the veteran, and then you can add the day 2 or day 3. I'd be surprised if you had the high-priced veteran, let's say like an Andy Dalton type, right? And then you
Ryan
add
Tannehill.
Yeah, something like that. And then you add the 6th overall pick on top of that. That I think would probably surprise me a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, let's not forget, Tommy DeVito is still on the roster.
Good point.
Tommy DeVito won 3 straight games last season. I mean, no one's going out saying he's in the MVP conversation right now, of course, but that right there is a developmental project at the quarterback position that I would think that the front office want to keep him around next season, potentially beyond, see what he can develop into.
I'm with you. All right, let's go to Hugo in New Jersey. He's up next. Hi, Hugo.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. John, I did listen to your huddle interview with Eric Eager and the one with Doug Farr. I got to say, 2 really interesting guests, and I think you did an exceptional job in asking all the right questions.
Thank you.
Kudos to you.
Appreciate that.
So I called in last week and sort of gave my philosophy on free agency, which is if you're going to spend money on free agency, spend it on difference makers. If your intent is not just to plug something for the year, but really improve the roster over the long term. And I told Paul and Lance that when I looked at the lineup of free agents, my favorite free agent was Christian Wilkins. And one of the things I noticed your guests have said is that the Giants really do need a three technique. And this is part of the point of it's an arms race in the NFC East, and you got to go against the Dallas offensive line and the Philly offensive line. And I think right now, obviously Dex is great, but I think really the other guys we have on the roster are really nose tackles. There's no real three technique.
No, I agree with that, Hugo. But can you have $50 million invested in two defensive tackles? Because that's what it's going to be between Dexter Lawrence and Christian Wilkins.
I tell you, I'd rather have the two defensive tackles. So it's always opportunity cost, right? So if you invest, would I give up Xavier McKinney and Saquon to have someone like Christian Wilkins? I think I would do that, yes. But, again, that's me. I like to build it from the inside out.
I also think, by the way, I do think he'll get franchise tagged, by the way, Wilkins. I can't imagine they're going to let him in unrestricted free agency.
That was the point they made, and I think I agree. So I did a little research and try to recreate the impact with three players. And the players are Sheldon Rankins at $10 million a year, Javon Kinlaw at $4 million, and these are the projections, by the way, and Willie Gay Jr., the linebacker. So players that have a real impact against both the run and the pass. And so that's $22 million, and that's about, what Wilkins would get in the open market. And I'd be interested you didn't ask this question of Eric Eager, but I would be interested in hearing his perspective. Do you go all in on one player, or is it more optimal to try to recreate the impact and spread out your risk across a few players? So
I think it depends on what position you're talking about. I think for defense, you want to avoid having holes, and I think on the offensive line, you want to avoid having holes because other teams can attack those weaknesses in their game planning, right? But I think if you're looking to, I'd rather spend $30 million on one awesome receiver than have three okay receivers at $10 million. You know what I mean? So I think it depends on the position you're talking about.
Exactly. Okay. Fair enough. Hey, this talk of potentially trading down, I don't think the Giants should trade down. I like 7 players in this draft, the 3 quarterbacks, the 3 receivers, and Joe Alt. So at 6, we're lined up to get one of those players. And there's a couple considerations. I think one, if you're at an inflection point where there's a real drop-off in talent, and I think there is, given my statements about a top 7, in my view. But, the last time the Giants did this was in 2021, and maybe the perception was that there weren't real blue-chip talents. That, hindsight is 20/20, but Micah Parsons is obviously a blue-chip player.
And everyone says Micah Parsons. Everyone forgets that Rashawn Slater was sitting there to get picked, too, and that's who I would have picked. That's who I was banging the table for. I wanted Rashawn Slater.
Those were the next 2 picks. After the Giants traded the pick to Chicago for Fields, the next 2 picks were Parsons and Slater.
I do think Micah Parsons, Hugo, he wasn't an edge rusher coming out of college. That was a conversion, right? And I think it is hard to pick a player that high and say, we're going to use a top 15 pick on you, and then we're going to completely change your position and what you do. That's a risk. So I get why you wouldn't want to take Parsons there, because I do think there were real questions, but I would have been all in on Rashawn Slater, absolutely, 100%.
But the point is, everyone always complains about not picking Micah Parsons. The point I wanted to make is it's not only about where the blue chip talent is, but your execution with the haul you get in the trade. And unfortunately, it was executed disastrously by the Giants by picking Kadarius Toney, trading up to get Aaron Robinson, Evan Neal, and I think Daniel Bellinger with the 4th they got from Chicago in 2022. But if you just tweak it slightly, instead of going with Toney, a guy who was on the board, Darisaw, the offensive tackle who has played at an all-pro level, then you get the butterfly effect the following year. Instead of taking Evan Neal, you take Garrett Wilson. And then you asked me the question, would I trade an all-pro caliber offensive tackle, a number one receiver in Daniel Bellinger for Rashawn Slater? I would not. I would really have to think about it in a trade for Micah Parsons. I probably would not. Going back to my point about, the portfolio of players exceeds the ultra talent that you have in someone like Parsons. Or
I get you. No, that makes sense. And look, and that's why, Hugo, and appreciate the call. We got one more call we want to get in here. That's why, generally speaking, man, I'm in favor of trading down. I think you always want more swings. You can find good players all over the draft if you draft the right guy. But I do think for certain, again, premium positions with blue chip grades, it's hard to trade out of that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And look, I am all over the internet looking for mock drafts constantly for Giants.com. I have barely seen any that think the Giants are going to trade down.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but I've only seen mock drafts of the Giants moving up in order to pick one of the quarterbacks, not moving down and, taking the top lineman available or, whatever position it is.
Pearson, you've been running these shows. Can you believe how, gung-ho Dottino seems to be on trading down this year? He never wants to trade down. Now, this year of all years, he wants to trade down.
Yeah, I don't know what's in the water he's drinking this year.
It's very different, right? I'm not crazy, am I?
No.
Okay.
It's strange.
Yeah. Like I tried to convince, like the Saquon year, I was trying to convince him to trade down for months. Nothing.
And just one thing I just wanted to point out about what Hugo was saying, or something he said, was he talked about, potential mistakes made in the 21 draft and then that butterflied into the 2022 draft. I don't think it's not fair to look at those two drafts in particular because those are two different regimes making the draft picks, two different front offices, two different coaching staffs. I don't really think it's fair to talk about, picking Tony in 2021 and how that led to Neil the next year. Just a point I wanted to make: two different general managers making the picks. It's not really fair to look at those two drafts together.
And I have trouble killing the Evan Neal pick because I thought he was the best offensive tackle in the draft that year. And the other guy that some people thought were ahead of him on the board, Ike Ekwonu, he's had just as many issues.
Yeah.
He's had a rough start to his career too. Charles Cross has been the best of the two, but he had injury issues last year. He missed half the year with injury. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
That's why drafting's tough, man. There are no sure things, which is why sometimes trading down is the best thing because you get more swings. Even if you think a guy's a blue chip player, doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a blue chip player, depending on how things go.
That's true. I just was looking back to the 2022 draft. I know it's easy to say in hindsight now that maybe the Giants should have taken Evan Neal. Evan Neal going into that draft was considered by pretty much everyone to be the safest pick in the draft. One of the safest. That was consensus.
Heading into the combine, he was being talked about as the top 2 or 3 pick.
There were mock drafts that had him going 1 overall.
Yeah.
Until maybe a month before the draft. Not that early in the pre-draft process that there were outlets out there that legitimately thought he could be the number 1 pick. So again, hindsight, it's easy to look back now and say, oh, maybe the Giants should have taken someone else. But at the time, with tackle being perhaps the biggest need on the roster, no one was arguing with that pick.
Hey, and
not a single person.
There were mock drafts, man, and you know this because you were, again, tracking them for Giants.com, where Neal and Thibodeau were 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And a lot of those mock drafts.
Several mock drafts.
Many of them. So, it's the way the world works. All right. We're going to wrap up today's show. I know we got to make sure we wrap up on time today. I got a meeting I got to. Let's go to Wilson. Wilson, what's going on, pal?
Hey, guys. How are you?
You got to be quick for me today, all right, Wilson?
All right. Johnny, listen, real quick. You didn't just say the Giants are building for the future just now, did you?
I think in the draft you're always building for the future, Wilson. I think even the best teams in the league are building for the future in the draft.
Johnny, let me tell you something. I don't believe in this head coach, and I don't believe in this general manager whatsoever. But that's my opinion. If the Giants don't make the playoffs this year, they got to fire everybody. If you're telling me again that it's another rebuilding year after we've been rebuilding for 10 years, I mean, when is enough?
This regime has not been here for 10 years, Wilson. You cannot put the sins of past regimes on the current one.
Okay, but the past 3, Johnny, listen, we have the second worst odds to win the Super Bowl. We backed again to be in the laughing stock of the NFL. I mean, how many years can we be the laughing stock of the NFL? I mean, this is their third year. Brian Dable's third year, and John Shane's third year. They're already like softening the cushion that, well, it takes time to build the roster. We don't want to hear that anymore, man. I mean, how many years we're going to hear the same thing? So what is our goal next year? To win, we win 6 games. To win 7 games? That's our goal next year?
I think the goal next year is to make the playoffs.
Joe Shane, after the Giants made the playoffs in 2022, Joe Shane said the goal was to be in this situation year after year. Just to be consistent playoff contenders. Tune now,
Matt, he's changing his tune. If you listen to him between the lines, he's changing his tune, man. I mean, if you tell Giants fans, "Oh, we're gonna rebuild again," I mean, come on. You can't rebuild with a $40 million quarterback anyway. So I don't know what they're gonna. If they don't, let me ask something, and I hang up. If they don't make the playoffs, do they have to clean house? Yes or no?
I don't think under any circumstance. Thank you, appreciate the call, Wilson. You let go of the general manager after this year. Under no circumstance. You can't give a GM 3 off seasons to redo a whole roster, especially when one of them you had no resources to add anybody because you were tearing everything down and getting your salary cap straight.
Yeah, no,
you can't.
I agree with you.
You can't.
I mean,
how many times do you think firing the coach? Every time the Giants fired a coach after 2 years, everyone thought it was going to fix everything. Did it fix everything once? Did it fix anything?
No.
Didn't fix anything.
You want continuity.
You have to have some level of continuity. You can't just keep changing, captains of your ship and changing course. You're never going to get to your goal.
Yeah, and Wilson brought up Giants having, low Super Bowl odds. It's February 21st.
Yeah,
the offseason has not begun. The Giants haven't made a single move to change the trajectory of the team for next year. So to look at Super Bowl odds now, I get it's like a fun thing to do because the Super Bowl just happened 10 days ago. But it's a fruitless exercise. Like, what is the point in looking at Super Bowl odds right now?
Correct.
They still have free agency. They still have the draft. The roster isn't going to look like week 1. It's not going to look like what it looks like right now.
The Giants were not that, I tried to make this point earlier, and then I got it wrong. The Giants this year were not that far off from the Giants the year before. It was just a couple of close games going either way and a couple more guys staying healthy. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, you're winning 8 or 9 games again. Which is exactly what they did 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, they finished with 6 wins, and that included the close loss against the Jets, the close loss against Buffalo.
And remember, the 9-win team, they won all those close games.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen every year. You can't expect that to happen every year. And you can't expect to have as many injuries as the Giants had at the start of the year either.
I hope not, at least.
It's just kind of, guys, I get it. You're impatient. You want things to happen quickly. But if you act like you're all in every year and you make decisions that way, you're never actually going to get there. You actually have to have a patient plan to make this stuff work. And if it doesn't happen in 3 years, that's fine. Everyone last offseason wanted to fire Leon Rose. The Knicks. They got tired. Oh, the Knicks have sucked for 20 years. You got to change guys again. Right? And then all of a sudden they signed Jalen Brunson and he's a superstar and everything changes.
Yeah.
A couple moves here can change things real quick. The NFL is different than the NBA, fewer players and all that stuff. I get all that. But you have to give these guys some bit of a path here, guys.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, just real quick, 2022, the Giants won, it seemed like every single one of those close games. Every single one. This past season, I mentioned the Buffalo game, the Jets game, and then later in the season, the Eagles game and the Rams game. Yeah. Those are 4 games that were one-score games. The Giants were in all of those games until the very end.
They were closer to 500 this year in 500
that
games.
Went the other way.
Mm-hmm.
If they had won even 3 of those games, 2 of those games, people would be looking at this past season so much differently.
Right.
So we're talking about a couple of small breaks that didn't go the Giants' way, and all of a sudden, the outlook on the team has changed so drastically.
And that's when the Giants, the decision makers. It's crazy.
When the Giants endured what seemed like an insane amount of injuries last year, which led to them also, which we haven't even talked about, they had the second youngest total snaps played of any team in the entire league.
Yeah.
Second youngest. With all those injuries, just have some patience. That's it.
Absolutely. Matt, good stuff, my man.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us, everybody. It'll be, I don't know who's on tomorrow. It's probably Lance and Paul. I don't know, but we'll find out. I think it's Lance and Paul. Make sure you stay tuned to Big Blue Kickoff Live. Thanks for joining us. For Matt, I'm Schmeelk. We'll see you next time.